Chakra and Kekkei Genkai. If every shinobi in Naruto has a personal slogan, then Deidara's would be, "Art is an explosion," and trust me, he meant that literally. His entire body, his whole fighting style, and even his view on life revolved around blowing things up in the most stylish way possible. Deidara's power came from a unique Kekkei Genkai known as explosion release, a deadly fusion of earth release and lightning release chakra. Earth chakra gave shape and density to his creations, while lightning chakra gave them that final spark. Boom. And when Deidara shouted his iconic Katsu command, the whole battlefield shook. That's pressing play on a deadly art show. What makes it even crazier is how his body was literally restructured by this stolen power. Because of the forbidden jutsu he took from Iwagakure, Deidara had mouths in both palms and one stitched-up mouth on his chest. Imagine going to shake hands with this guy and suddenly realizing his hand might chew your fingers off. But for Deidara, those mouths were tools, allowing him to knead clay with chakra and turn it into living bombs. His explosives ranged from tiny C1 creatures crawling like bugs, all the way up to the city-destroying C3, or even the invisible nanobomb C4. In his fight against Gaara, he dropped a giant C3 bomb the size of a small nuke to bait Gaara into exposing a weakness. Later, against Sasuke, he unleashed C4, countless microscopic bombs that attacked from inside the body. The sheer creativity of his Kekkei Genkai turned every battle into a deadly gallery. Iwagakure's forbidden technique. Now, let's talk about the foundation of Deidara's art, the forbidden jutsu he stole from his village. This Iwagakure Genjutsu allowed a shinobi to mix chakra directly into other substances. In Deidara's case, it was clay. The price of using it? Your body changes. For him, it meant sprouting mouths in unnatural places. Creepy? Yes. Effective? Absolutely. When Deidara defected from Iwagakure, he was running with their secret weapon. With those extra mouths, he could sculpt explosives faster than any normal shinobi could prepare seals. Think about it. While most ninjas are busy weaving hand signs, Deidara's already chewing up clay and spitting out a dragon. Speed and precision were on his side. Every single one of his bombs, from the small ones to the giant art pieces, came from this Genjutsu. Without it, he wouldn't have been able to fight on equal terms with monsters like Gaara or Sasuke. It's the hidden backbone of his entire arsenal. You could say this forbidden jutsu was the paintbrush that let Deidara paint his explosive masterpieces. Explosive clay. If explosion release was his power and the Genjutsu was his brush, then explosive clay was Deidara's canvas. This was his core skill, turning plain old clay into weapons of mass destruction. With each handful of clay kneaded through those strange mouths, he infused chakra until the figures came alive. Birds, spiders, centipedes, anything his imagination could mold, he could create. The real beauty was in its flexibility. Some bombs were tiny distractions. Others were giant city-flattening monsters. Some could fly, scout, and explode mid-air, while others crawled under your feet and blew you sky-high. And remember, all it took was Deidara's calm little Katsu to send them off. In combat, this gave him insane tactical options. Against Sasuke, he could release waves of small bombs to pressure him, then summon massive creations to control the entire battlefield. Against Gaara, the sheer size of his C3 clay bomb forced Gaara to protect the village instead of himself, allowing Deidara to sneak in the finishing move. Every time he fought, the clay was performance art, designed to make his opponents dance before the final explosion. Explosive landmines. This brings us straight into one of Deidara's most underappreciated tricks, his explosive landmines. These were deployed directly from the C2 dragon. Toby would scatter them beneath the ground while Deidara kept the enemy busy from above. It was a two-layered strategy, like playing chess where every move was meant to force Sasuke into a checkmate. The landmines themselves were deadly. Hidden beneath the surface, they activated on contact. If you stepped on one, boom, end of the match. And the genius here was about the explosion and the psychological pressure. Knowing the ground itself might blow up at any second forces opponents to hesitate, and that hesitation gave Deidara the upper hand. Against Sasuke, this tactic almost worked. With bombs falling from the sky and mines covering the earth, Deidara had effectively turned the battlefield into a cage of explosions. Unfortunately for him, Sasuke was too quick and too sharp with his lightning-style counters. But the strategy itself? Pure brilliance. The landmines proved Deidara wasn't only about flashy, giant bombs. He could be subtle, too, laying traps, predicting movement, and turning the battlefield itself into his canvas. It's moments like this that show he was not only a bomber, he was a tactician with a sadistic sense of humor. C1. Every great artist starts with sketches, and for Deidara, those sketches were his C1 clay bombs. These were the smallest and most basic of his creations, often shaped into birds, spiders, or little crawling insects. Cute on the outside, but trust me, you don't want one of these things anywhere near your face. The beauty of C1 was speed and numbers. Deidara could knead and deploy dozens in seconds, scattering them across the battlefield. Each one packed a limited punch, sure, but when you've got a sky raining with explosive pigeons, suddenly small explosions don't sound so small anymore. He often used them as tests, like throwing darts at a shield to find its weak spots. Against Gaara, Deidara sent waves of C1 bombs to pressure him, carefully studying how Gaara's sand reacted. It wasn't about destroying the Kazekage in one hit. It was about making him move, exposing an opening. That's the genius behind C1. They weren't designed to win the fight alone. They were distractions, probes, and little sparks leading up to the real fireworks. Think of C1 as the appetizers before the main course. They set the stage, they annoy the opponent, and sometimes that's all Deidara needed to get the advantage. C2. Now, if C1 was a quick sketch, then C2 was Deidara's full-scale mural. Big, bold, and impossible to ignore. This was the iconic clay dragon, soaring through the skies like his personal battleship. Perched on its back, Deidara looked like some kind of twisted general conducting an airstrike. The C2 dragon produced explosive projectiles continuously, raining down bombs across the battlefield. And here's the kicker. Deidara could coordinate those blasts, forcing his enemy into tight corners. Imagine trying to dodge an airstrike while the bomber is laughing at you from above. That's the nightmare Sasuke had to deal with. In their battle, Deidara unleashed the full fury of C2. The dragon bombarded Sasuke from the sky, creating massive blasts that shook the ground. At the same time, Deidara cleverly coordinated with Tobi, who planted landmines beneath the battlefield. So while Sasuke dodged explosions from above, he was unknowingly being herded into a deadly trap. The only reason Sasuke survived was because of his insane speed and his Sharingan reflexes. Otherwise, the C2 dragon would have been remembered as the shinobi world's most terrifying bomber ride. C3. C3 was Deidara's nuclear option, literally. This clay bomb was massive, a floating sphere the size of a building, crafted to bring destruction on a scale few shinobi could even imagine. He dropped it during his battle with Gaara, and honestly, that moment felt like Deidara was saying, "Forget shinobi duels. I'm about to show you how to erase a village." The way it worked was simple but terrifying. By kneading and compressing his chakra into the clay, Deidara turned it into a controlled atomic-like bomb. Once released from the sky, the explosion could engulf an entire settlement in seconds. But here's the scary part. It wasn't about raw destruction. Deidara had enough control to adjust the output. That meant he could design it to blow away buildings while leaving a target alive, or at least weak enough to capture. Against Gaara, this was genius. By dropping C3 over Tsunagakure, Deidara forced Gaara into an impossible decision: protect himself or protect his village. Of course, Gaara chose the village, using every grain of sand he could summon to block the blast. And while everyone's eyes were glued to the nuke in the sky, Deidara's true plan unfolded. Hidden within Gaara's sand was a smaller clay charge. When Gaara used that sand defensively, Deidara detonated it inside the shield, breaking through the absolute defense. That's strategy, deception, and raw firepower all rolled into one clay ball. C4. If C3 was all about spectacle, C4 was about invisible terror. Deidara called it his ultimate art, and for good reason. C4 created destruction on a microscopic level. The mechanics are chilling. Deidara ingests clay into the mouth on his chest, then spews out a giant clay replica of himself. When that colossal clone detonates, it releases a cloud of nano-sized bombs, so small they ride the air like dust. If you breathe them in, they enter your body and attach to your cells. Then, with one command, Katsu, your cells themselves are destroyed from the inside out. Imagine your whole body crumbling silently, not from an external blast, but from a chain reaction inside your own lungs. He unleashed C4 against Sasuke, confident it would end the fight. And honestly, any other shinobi would have been obliterated. But this was Sasuke. He had the Sharingan. With its heightened perception, Sasuke could see the microscopic bombs floating in the air, something no normal eye could detect. By channeling lightning chakra through his body, he neutralized the explosives before they could detonate inside him. C0. Finally, we reach C0, the suicidal masterpiece. This was Deidara's last resort, his final stroke of artistry. When backed into a corner, when every bomb and every strategy failed, he turned his own body into the explosion. The mechanics are gruesome. Deidara tears open the mouth stitched onto his chest, shovels clay into it, and forces all of his chakra into one catastrophic detonation. His body literally becomes the bomb. The result? A blast so huge it could be seen from miles away, consuming everything in a radius of several kilometers. This wasn't about tactics anymore. This was pure desperation, mixed with pride. An artist destroying himself to ensure his art left a permanent mark. In his final clash with Sasuke, C0 was the last card he played. Trapped, out of chakra, and enraged that his art had been dismissed, Deidara chose death over defeat. The explosion ripped the landscape apart, creating a blinding flash that could be seen far beyond the battlefield. To him, this was the grand finale, the proof that his philosophy, art is an explosion, was his very life. And yet, Sasuke survived by summoning Manda and teleporting away at the last second. Deidara's final piece, his ultimate performance, failed to claim its intended victim. But in a twisted way, that only reinforced the tragic irony of his story. His art was brilliant, terrifying, and unforgettable, but it never earned him the recognition he craved from the Uchihas. Still, to the shinobi world, that last blinding explosion remained one of the most haunting displays of power. Clay clone. Not every situation calls for a massive dragon or a giant nuke. Sometimes all you need is a decoy with teeth. That's exactly what Deidara's clay clone was. On the surface, it looked like a simple shadow clone copy. But unlike Naruto's versions, this one came with an explosive surprise. Deidara molded these clones out of leftover clay, giving them a physical presence. They could move, fight, and distract enemies like the real thing. And the kicker? They could detonate at any moment. Think of it as shaking hands with a copy, only to realize the copy is a ticking bomb. In his battle with Kakashi, this trick saved his life. After losing both arms, one crushed by Gaara, the other sucked into another dimension by Kamui, Deidara was basically cornered. Instead of admitting defeat, he swapped himself out with a clay clone. The clone exploded, buying him enough time to slip away underground. It was a brilliant mix of deception and survival, and it showed how much he relied on his clay not just for offense, but for clever escapes. Suicide bombing clone. Now, if the clay clone was a tricky decoy, the suicide bombing clone was Deidara's way of saying, if I go down, I'm taking you with me. This version was designed to explode at maximum power the moment it was destroyed or triggered. The process was a little twisted. Deidara combined the principles of the shadow clone technique with his clay creations, creating a copy that looked like him, but was essentially a living landmine. We saw this during his clash with Naruto and Kakashi after Gaara was captured. Deidara was heavily injured, both arms gone, and facing two relentless leaf shinobi. To make sure they couldn't finish him off, he left behind a suicide bombing clone. When Team Guy and Team Kakashi thought they had him cornered, boom! The clone detonated in a massive explosion. It didn't kill them, thanks to Kakashi's quick use of Kamui, but it was enough to give Deidara the space he needed to escape. It's the kind of move that fits his philosophy perfectly. Even a fake copy of himself could become art through destruction. Shadow clone technique. Finally, let's talk about the standard shadow clone technique. A jutsu almost every shinobi knows, but in Deidara's hands it was far from standard. Shadow clones are usually support tools. They split chakra, create extra fighters, and vanish when struck. But Deidara used them in a much more tactical way. He often combined them with his clay creations, multiplying not just himself, but the number of bombs flying across the battlefield. It was like having a squadron of bombers instead of just one. During his fight with Naruto, this became clear. While Naruto spammed his usual clones, Deidara fought back with clay clones and shadow clones, overwhelming the battlefield with bodies and explosions. It turned the fight into a chaotic storm where it was hard to tell who was real, who was fake, and which one was about to blow up in your face. The shadow clone technique by itself isn't flashy, but Deidara made it deadly by combining it with his unique art style. Instead of creating more versions of himself, he created more chances for destruction. For him, even the simplest ninjutsu could become another brushstroke in his explosive gallery. Explosive clay dolls. Now this one is a little bonus that only anime watchers got to see. The explosive clay dolls. These were creepy little puppets made of clay, controlled remotely through cords. Deidara could make them walk, run, and swarm like toy soldiers, then detonate them when they got close to the target. In terms of mechanics, it's like he gave his bombs strings and played puppeteer. They weren't as devastating as his C-series bombs, but they added variety and kept his enemies on edge. You're already worried about birds bombing you from the sky, and suddenly, boom, here comes a pack of dolls crawling up at your feet. These dolls popped up in filler arcs, where Deidara had more screen time to flex his creativity. And honestly, they fit perfectly with his theme. Every clay creation of his had personality, whether it was an elegant bird, a crawling spider, or in this case, uncanny little dolls. Each one carried his signature, art that only lived for a moment, ending in a flash of fire. 5 seal barrier pass technique. Finally, let's talk about something a little different. The 5 seal barrier pass technique. Unlike his personal bombs, this one was more of a team utility jutsu. It was used during Akatsuki's tailed beast sealing rituals. The technique allowed members to break through the 5 seal barrier, a defensive jutsu designed to protect sacred or sealed locations. By dismantling the seals, Akatsuki could access the area where the bijou were kept and prepare for the extraction process. For Deidara, this wasn't about art or explosions. It was about fulfilling his role as part of the organization. In the missions where they captured Gaara or hunted Isobu, this barrier-breaking ability ensured the team could move forward smoothly. It shows that Deidara, as wild as he was, could still cooperate when it came to Akatsuki's bigger goals. He was a rogue artist doing his own thing. He contributed to the machinery of the group. Eye scope and Genjutsu resistance. One of Deidara's biggest insecurities was getting humiliated by the Sharingan. The first time he met Itachi, he was trapped in a Genjutsu before he even realized it. From that day, Deidara developed a burning hatred for those eyes, and he wasn't about to let it happen again. So he trained his left eye specifically to counter Genjutsu. By forcing himself to recognize unusual chakra flow, he learned how to break illusions and see through tricks. To support this, he wore a special scope over that eye. It worked like a sniper's lens, giving him long-range vision and precision targeting from the skies. Combine the scope with his trained left eye, and suddenly he was not only harder to trick with illusions, but also deadly accurate at picking out his targets. In practice, this made him terrifying in aerial battles. Against Gaara, he used the scope to track every movement of the sand shield while bombing from above. Against Sasuke, the Genjutsu resistance let him fight without falling into the same trap that destroyed him against Itachi. It was Deidara's way of saying, "You won't make a fool out of me twice." Explosive clay minion. Now here's where Deidara's art takes a playful turn. Instead of making giant dragons or nukes, he could also craft small living minions out of clay. Birds, spiders, centipedes, you name it. He'd give them form, infuse them with chakra, and let them run wild. These weren't mindless bombs either. They could crawl, fly, and chase enemies like autonomous weapons. Some were used to harass opponents, while others snuck in unnoticed until Deidara decided to trigger them. The beauty of these little creatures was their unpredictability. Imagine fighting off a wave of tiny clay spiders, only to realize one of them had slipped behind your defenses. Boom. Too late. He used these minions constantly. Against Gaara, clay birds acted like scouts and distractions while the big bombs loomed overhead. Against Naruto and Kakashi, clay spiders and insects made the battlefield chaotic, forcing them to divide their attention. They weren't the main act, but they were the background dancers that made Deidara's performances unforgettable. Finally, let's talk about the thing that often gets overlooked: Deidara's intelligence. For all his wild boasting and flashy art, this guy had a razor-sharp tactical mind. Deidara analyzed opponents quickly and ruthlessly. Against Gaara, he noticed that the Kazakaji's absolute defense wasn't truly absolute. Gaara couldn't move all of his sand at once. By mixing tiny clay bombs into the sand he captured, Deidara turned Gaara's greatest strength into his downfall. Against Sasuke, he laid traps with C2 landmines and tried to herd him into C4, a strategy that would have killed almost anyone else. He thrived on misdirection. He'd lure enemies into traps, use clones as bait, and combine explosions with the environment to control the fight. Every battle felt like a twisted performance where he was the director, and his opponent was another character in his play. That's what made Deidara so dangerous. He wasn't only a bomber with flashy toys. He was a genius tactician who used his art to manipulate the battlefield, always searching for that perfect moment when the audience, and his enemies, were forced to admit, art really is an explosion.